Aunt Maria was crying now too, recording the moment on her phone just as she had recorded the scene in the mall. The morning sunlight streamed through their small living room window, making the silver heart sparkle. "Will you wear it?" Tommy asked hopefully. His mom nodded, wiping her eyes. "Every single day." She turned around, lifting her hair so Tommy could clasp it around her neck. His fingers fumbled with the tiny clasp, but he finally got it. When she turned back around, the heart pendant settled perfectly against her throat, catching the light just as Tommy had imagined it would. But what made it truly beautiful was his mom's smile. Tired from her night shift but radiant with joy and love. "You know what this means," she said, touching the heart pendant gently. "Now every time I look at this, I'll remember not just how much you love me, but how kindness can come from unexpected places. How a little boy's love for his mama can touch a stranger's heart and create a moment of pure magic." Tommy beamed, his own heart feeling so full it might burst. "And you'll remember to dance in the kitchen wearing it." His mom laughed, pulling him close again. "Every chance I get, mi amor. Every chance I get." As they sat there, mother and son wrapped in a tight hug, with Aunt Maria wiping away happy tears, Tommy thought about how sometimes the best gifts aren't just the ones we give, but the ones we receive when we open our hearts to the magic of kindness. His Pokemon wallet might be empty now, but his heart had never been fuller. The 2 weeks leading up to his mom's birthday felt like the longest of Tommy's life. Every time she came home from her night shift, he had to stop himself from blurting out the secret. The carefully wrapped blue package sat hidden in Aunt Maria's apartment, waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, the big day arrived. Tommy woke up extra early, even before his mom got home from her night shift. He and Aunt Maria had spent the previous evening decorating the small apartment with streamers and balloons, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. "Remember," Aunt Maria whispered as she helped Tommy set up the birthday breakfast, "let her rest a little before you give her the gift. Night shifts are tough." Tommy nodded, practically bouncing with excitement as he arranged the pancakes he and his aunt had made. He'd even managed to shape one like a heart, though it was a bit lopsided. When the key turned in the lock at 7:30 a.m., Tommy's heart started racing. His mom walked in, still in her blue nurse's scrubs, looking tired but happy. Her face lit up at the sight of the decorations. "Surprise!" Tommy shouted, running to give her a hug. She caught him in her arms, holding him tight despite her exhaustion. "Oh, mio," she said, her voice soft with emotion. "You did all this for me. Happy birthday, Mom. We made pancakes, and the hot one is kind of squished, but it still tastes good, and there's fresh coffee, and—" She laughed, the sound making her eyes crinkle at the corners just the way Tommy loved. "Slow down, mi amor. Let me catch my breath." They sat down to breakfast, Tommy watching anxiously as his mom ate the heart-shaped pancake first, declaring it the best pancake she ever tasted. Aunt Maria sat with them, sharing knowing looks with Tommy that made him wiggle in his seat with anticipation. After breakfast, when his mom had changed out of her scrubs into her comfortable weekend clothes, Tommy couldn't wait any longer. "Can I give you your present now?" he asked, trying not to sound too eager but failing completely. "Of course, baby," she said, settling onto their worn but comfortable couch. "Though you've already given me such a wonderful birthday breakfast." Tommy ran to get the package from its hiding place. The blue paper still sparkled, the silver ribbon perfectly curled thanks to Mrs. Lee's expert wrapping. His hands trembled slightly as he carried it to his mom. "It's kind of a big present," he said, suddenly nervous. And there's a story that goes with it." His mom took the package, her expression curious. "A story? Well, those are the best kinds of presents." As she carefully began unwrapping the paper, Tommy glanced at Aunt Maria, who gave him an encouraging nod. The room felt very quiet except for the soft sound of paper being unfolded. When she opened the box and saw the silver necklace with the heart pendant, his mom's hand flew to her mouth. For a moment, she just stared at it, not saying anything. "I know about the old necklace," Tommy said quickly, the words tumbling out. "The one you sold for my school supplies. I heard you telling Aunt Maria. So I saved up money for 6 months doing chores and helping neighbors to buy you a new one that looks just like it." Tears were rolling down his mom's cheeks now, but Tommy kept going. And then something magical happened. "You know how you always tell me that kindness comes back to you like a boomerang? Well, it really does. He told her everything about counting his money, about the disappointment at the jewelry counter, and about the kind stranger who turned out to be Keanu Reeves. His mom listened with wide eyes, holding the necklace in her trembling hands. He said, Tommy's voice got softer. He said that sometimes the universe puts us in the right place at the right time to help someone else's story turn out better. His mom picked up the card he'd written, reading it through her tears. Then she opened Keanu's note, her hand pressed against her heart as she read his words. Min amour, she whispered, pulling Tommy close. You did all this for me? You always do everything for me, Mom. You work so hard and never buy anything nice for yourself. I wanted you to have something beautiful like you. She held him tight, the necklace pressed between them. Tommy, mi vida, you are the most beautiful gift I could ever have. This necklace is wonderful, but what makes it precious is all the love you put into getting it. Your kind heart, your hard work, your thoughtfulness. May I add a small note as well? Keanu asked softly. Tommy nodded, handing over the pen. Keanu wrote for a few moments, folded his note, and tucked it into a separate envelope. This is for your mom to read after she opens the gift, he explained. Just a little something from one parent to another. Mrs. Lee finished wrapping the package, the blue paper gleaming under the store lights. She tied it with a silver ribbon that curled perfectly at the ends, then placed both cards carefully on top. Would you like a bag for that? She asked, but Tommy shook his head. No, thank you. I want to hold it all the way home. As Keanu handed over his credit card to cover the remaining balance, he turned to Tommy. You know what? I think this might be the most special purchase I've ever been part of. Tommy hugged the wrapped package to his chest, feeling the weight of not just the necklace, but of months of planning, a chance encounter, and an afternoon he would never forget. The box felt warm against his heart, as if it had absorbed all the love and kindness that had gone into making this moment possible. Little did he know that this wasn't just about a necklace anymore. This was about how a simple act of kindness could ripple out into the world, touching lives in ways that nobody could predict. And somewhere in the city, his mom was finishing up her shift at the hospital, completely unaware that her son's love and a stranger's kindness had combined to create a moment of pure magic in an ordinary mall on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. The gentle hum of the mall seemed to fade into the background as Mrs. Lee carefully laid out different gift-wrapping options on the counter. Tommy stood on his tiptoes, examining each choice with the seriousness of an art critic at a museum. Maybe the blue one, he suggested, pointing to a shimmering paper with tiny silver stars. Mom always says blue is the color of trust. That's why nurses wear blue uniforms. Keanu nodded approvingly. I like that. The stars make it special, like the night shift she works. He leaned in conspirationally. You know, my mom used to say that stars are like little windows where love peeks through. Tommy's eyes lit up. Really? That's kind of like what my mom says about hearts, that they're like doors that let love in and out. He pointed to the heart-shaped pendant. That's another reason why this necklace is perfect. As Mrs. Lee began wrapping the gift with expert hands, Tommy carefully counted out his savings on the counter. $43, he announced, separating the bills into neat piles, and 78 cents. The coins made tiny clinking sounds as he placed them on the glass surface. A small crowd had gathered outside the store, phones recording the heartwarming scene, but inside, time seemed to move at its own special pace. Mrs. Lee counted Tommy's money with the same respect she would show to someone buying the most expensive diamond in the store. Would you like to write a card to go with it? She asked, pulling out a selection of greeting cards. Tommy bit his lip, thinking hard. I'm not very good at writing fancy things. Sometimes the simplest words mean the most, Keanu suggested. He sat down on a nearby chair, making himself comfortable. Want to practice what you might say? Sometimes that helps. Tommy nodded, grateful for the suggestion. Well, I want to tell her that I know about the old necklace, but I don't want to make her sad. And I want her to know that she's the best mom ever. But that sounds kind of basic. Keanu offered with a gentle smile. Yeah, I want it to be special, like she is. Keanu thought for a moment. You know, I once had to give a very important speech, and I was worried about the same thing, making it special enough. Want to know what helped me? Tommy nodded eagerly, while Aunt Maria pulled out her phone, quietly recording this precious moment. I just told a story about a small moment that meant a lot to me. Sometimes the smallest moments show the biggest love. Tommy's face scrunched up in concentration, like how she always checks under my bed for monsters, even though I'm 8 and basically too old for that. But she never makes me feel bad about asking. That's perfect, Keanu said warmly. That's exactly the kind of thing that shows love. Mrs. Lee handed Tommy a pen and a simple white card. With careful concentration, he began to write, his tongue sticking out slightly at the corner of his mouth. Dear Mom, I know about the necklace you sold to buy my school stuff. I heard you telling Aunt Maria. I saved up for months to get you a new one because you deserve beautiful things too. Thank you for checking under my bed even when you're tired from work, for dancing with me in the kitchen even when I step on your toes, and for loving me so much that you would give up something special for me. Now I want to give you something special back. Love, Tommy. P.S. A nice man helped me buy this because he said kindness is like a boomerang. I hope this makes you as happy as your smile makes me. As Tommy finished writing, he looked up to see Keanu wiping something suspiciously like a tear from his eye. Even Mrs. Lee was dabbing at her face with a tissue. Tommy looked at the necklace again, then at his Pokemon wallet full of carefully saved money, and finally at Keanu. The actor's eyes were warm and patient, waiting for Tommy's decision without pressure. Finally, Tommy took a deep breath and stood up straight, just like his mom did when she was making an important decision. Okay, he said, but I want to use all of my money first, every penny I saved. And he hesitated, then continued bravely. And I'd like to do something to pay it forward somehow. To help someone else, like you're helping me. Keanu's smile grew even wider. I think that's a wonderful idea. Maybe we can talk about some ways to do that while we get the necklace wrapped up for your mom. The small crowd that had gathered outside the store window burst into applause, making Tommy blush. But as Mrs. Lee began carefully boxing up the necklace, he couldn't help but feel proud. Not just because he was getting the perfect gift for his mom, but because he was learning that sometimes accepting help could be just as brave as giving it. And as he watched Keanu pull out his wallet, Tommy realized that magic didn't always look like what you expected. Sometimes it looked like a kind stranger in a black jacket, showing up at exactly the right moment to turn disappointment into joy. The walk back to Henderson's department store felt different this time. Tommy's steps were lighter, though his heart was racing with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Keanu walked beside him, matching his pace, while Aunt Maria followed behind them, still shaking her head in amazement. Other shoppers stopped and stared as they passed. Some pulled out their phones to take pictures, but Keanu seemed to have a way of politely nodding while keeping his attention focused on Tommy. It was as if he built an invisible bubble around them where nothing else mattered except their mission. So, Keanu said as they approached the store, "Tell me more about your mom. What's her favorite thing to do when she's not working at the hospital?" Tommy thought for a moment, his face brightening. She loves to dance in the kitchen while she's cooking. Sometimes she plays these old songs from when she was young, and she tries to teach me the steps. He grinned, remembering. I'm not very good at it, but it makes her laugh. Keanu chuckled warmly. That sounds wonderful. You know, dancing in the kitchen is probably the purest form of happiness there is. As they reached the jewelry counter, Mrs. Lee looked up and did a double take, her eyes widening as she recognized Keanu. But before she could say anything, Tommy spoke up with newfound confidence. Could we see the heart necklace again, please? He asked politely, standing a little taller than before. Mrs. Lee glanced between Tommy and Keanu, a smile spreading across her face as she understood what was happening. Of course, young man. I kept it right here, just in case. She brought out the necklace, laying it carefully on a velvet display pad. The silver heart caught the light just as beautifully as before, but this time, instead of bringing sadness, it filled Tommy with hope. You know, Tommy said suddenly, turning to Keanu, I really appreciate your help, but... He twisted the hem of his Captain America shirt, gathering his courage. My mom always says we shouldn't take money from strangers, even nice ones. She says it's about self-respect. Instead of being upset, Keanu's face lit up with admiration. Your mom's taught you well, he said. How about this? I'm not giving you money. Think of it more like, I'm investing in kindness. The same way your mom invested in your future when she sold her necklace. Sometimes helping others isn't about charity, It's about recognizing the good in people and wanting to be part of their story. Tommy considered this, his forehead wrinkled in thought. Like when Mr. Rodriguez let me help with his newspapers. He said he could have gotten them himself, but he wanted to give me a chance to earn money for something important. Exactly like that, Keanu nodded. And you know what? The fact that you're thinking so carefully about this, that you want to do the right thing, that makes me want to help even more. Aunt Maria stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. Migo, sometimes life sends us angels in unexpected ways. Remember what your mom always says about kindness. That it's like a boomerang, Tommy recited. What you throw out into the world comes back to you. Well, Keanu said, smiling, maybe this is just your kindness boomerang coming back. All those months of saving money, doing extra chores, thinking about your mom's happiness, that's a lot of kindness you've put into the world. Mrs. Lee, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. You know, young man, I've worked here for 20 years, and I've never seen someone your age put so much thought and effort into a gift for their parent. That kind of love is rare and special. Keanu's smile grew wider. Your mom sounds very wise. But what if we made a deal? You've already saved up more than $40. That's a lot of hard work. What if I just helped make up the difference? It would still be your gift from all your effort. I'd just be a little boost from the universe. The hope that began to bloom in Tommy's chest felt almost too big to contain. He looked at his aunt, who had tears in her eyes, then back at Keanu. Really? You'd do that? Sometimes kindness is like a chain reaction, Keanu said thoughtfully. Your mom was kind to sacrifice something she loved for you. You're being kind by working so hard to replace it. Maybe it's my turn to add a little kindness to the story. The ordinary mall bench had become something magical, a place where disappointment transformed into possibility, where a chance meeting was turning into a moment that would be remembered forever. As Tommy sat there, his Pokemon wallet still clutched in his hands, he realized that sometimes the best kinds of magic aren't in movies or books, but in the real moments when people choose to be kind to each other. Tommy looked up at the tall stranger, fidgeting with the zipper of his Pokemon wallet. The man's kind eyes reminded him a little of Mr. Rodriguez from next door, who always shared stories about his old days as a baseball player. There was something calming about his presence, despite his height and the way other people in the mall kept stopping to stare. I was trying to buy something for my mom, Tommy said finally, his voice small but steady. But I didn't have enough money. The man pulled over a nearby chair and sat down, making himself level with Tommy instead of towering over him. It was a simple gesture, but it made Tommy feel more comfortable, like they were just two people having a regular conversation. That must be disappointing, the man said, and Tommy could tell he really meant it. Would you mind telling me about what you were trying to get? Aunt Maria was still sitting there with wide eyes, a hand pressed against her chest like she couldn't believe what was happening. A small crowd had started to gather at a respectful distance, phones appearing in hands, but the man seemed focused entirely on Tommy's story. It's a necklace, Tommy explained, warming up to the conversation. A silver one with a heart. My mom used to have one just like it, but she had to sell it to buy my school supplies and new shoes when I was younger. He swallowed hard, then added, she thought I was sleeping when she told my aunt about it, but I heard everything. The man nodded thoughtfully, running a hand through his dark hair. That must have been hard for you to hear. Your mom sounds like someone who puts others first. She's the best mom ever, Tommy said with conviction. She works as a nurse at the hospital, doing the night shifts nobody else wants. Sometimes she's so tired when she comes home, but she still helps me with my homework and makes me pancakes on Sundays. His words started coming faster now, like a dam breaking. She never buys anything nice for herself, and I wanted to give her back something she lost because of me. Hey, the man said gently, you know it wasn't because of you, right? Parents make choices because they want to, not because they have to. Your mom made that choice out of love. Tommy kicked his feet against the bench leg, thinking about that. Maybe. But she deserves something special. I saved up for 6 months, did extra chores and everything. But the necklace costs $149.99, and I only have $43.78. He pulled out his wallet, showing the carefully arranged bills and coins. The man smiled, and something in his expression changed, like he just made an important decision. You know, I have a mother too, he said, his voice growing softer. She worked really hard to give me everything I needed when I was growing up. Sometimes I'd see her skip buying things for herself so she could get me art supplies or books. Tommy leaned forward, interested. Did she ever sell anything important? Not exactly the same, but she did sell her car once to help pay for my acting classes. The man's eyes grew distant with the memory. I didn't find out until years later. Mothers are good at hiding those kinds of sacrifices. A couple of teenagers walked by, whispering excitedly and pointing, but the man didn't seem to notice. He was focused on Tommy, who was nodding in understanding. What did you do when you found out? Tommy asked. I promised myself I'd spend the rest of my life trying to make her proud and helping others whenever I could. The man smiled. Which is actually why I'm here today. Sometimes the universe puts us in the right place at the right time to help someone else's story turn out better. Tommy's forehead wrinkled in confusion. What do you mean? The man glanced at Aunt Maria, who had finally found her voice. Senor Reeves, she began, you don't have to. Please, he interrupted gently, call me Keanu. And I want to help if you'll let me. He turned back to Tommy. Would you show me this necklace you picked out for your mom? Tommy's heart started beating faster. But it's too expensive, and my mom says we shouldn't accept money from strangers. Aunt Maria seemed frozen in place, her bracelets completely silent for the first time that day. The usual noise of the mall seemed to fade into the background, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Tommy glanced at his aunt, then back at the man, remembering his mom's lessons about talking to strangers. But there was something different about this situation. The man wasn't trying to get him to go anywhere or do anything. He just seemed genuinely concerned. Taking a deep breath, Tommy made a decision. Sometimes he remembered his mom saying, the kindness of strangers can surprise you. And right now, with his Pokemon wallet still heavy in his pocket for all the wrong reasons, Tommy felt like he could use a little surprise. Little did he know, this chance encounter was about to turn his disappointment into something more magical than he could have ever imagined. Because sometimes the best stories start with a moment of sadness, only to transform into something beautiful when we least expect it. The next few minutes would change everything, not just about Tommy's gift for his mom, but about how he understood kindness, generosity, and the unexpected ways that hope can appear just when we need it most. As the tall stranger waited patiently for Tommy's response, the ordinary Saturday afternoon at Highland Mall was about to become extraordinary. Tommy walked slowly away from the jewelry counter, each step feeling heavier than the last. His Pokemon wallet seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds now, the money inside suddenly feeling like nothing more than paper and metal instead of the treasure it had been just moments before. The bright mall lights that had seemed so magical earlier now felt too harsh, too revealing of his disappointment. We could try the other department store, Aunt Maria suggested, her voice gentle. Or maybe we could look at some different gifts. Your mom would love anything you pick out, mi amor. But Tommy just shook his head, not trusting himself to speak yet. He knew his aunt was trying to help, but nothing else would be the same. That necklace wasn't just any gift, it was a piece of his mom's history, a small way to make up for what she'd given up for him. They'd passed by the mall fountain, where coins sparkled at the bottom like tiny stars. Usually, Tommy would beg to throw in a penny and make a wish, but today he kept walking. He had exactly $43.78, and now he knew that wasn't enough to make his wish come true. Finding a quiet bench near a potted plant, Tommy sat down, his shoulders slumped. Aunt Maria settled beside him, her bracelets making soft tinkling sounds as she wrapped an arm around him. You know what I think? She said softly. I think you're the sweetest son anyone could ask for. Your mama is so lucky to have you. Tommy sniffled, trying hard not to cry. Big kids didn't cry in malls. But I wanted to get her something special. Something to show her I know about the old necklace. That she sold it for my school stuff. Aunt Maria squeezed his shoulder. Oh, Mio. I heard her telling you about it. Tommy continued, his voice barely above a whisper. She thought I was asleep, but I wasn't, and she never bought herself anything nice after that. She always says she doesn't need anything, but I know she misses it. A few shoppers walked past their bench, their shopping bags rustling. A little girl skipped by, holding an ice cream cone, but Tommy barely noticed. His mind was stuck on the image of the necklace, so close but so far away. "Maybe I could do more chores," he said, straightening up a little. Or maybe Mrs. Chen needs more help with her plants. I could save up more money." But even as he said it, Tommy knew it would take months more of saving to reach the price of the necklace. His mom's birthday was in 2 weeks. The math just didn't work, no matter how he tried to add it up in his head. Just then, a tall figure in a black jacket walked past their bench, then stopped and turned back. Tommy was too lost in his thoughts to notice at first, but Aunt Maria's sudden intake of breath made him look up. The man stood there quietly for a moment, his long dark hair falling around his face, wearing a kind expression that somehow made him seem familiar, even though Tommy had never seen him before. He wore simple clothes, jeans, boots, and that black jacket, but there was something about him that made other shoppers slow down and do double takes as they passed by. "Dios mío," Aunt Maria whispered under her breath, her eyes wide with recognition. The man smiled gently and took a step closer to their bench. His voice was soft and friendly when he spoke. "Hey there. I couldn't help but overhear. Is everything okay?" Tommy looked up at the stranger, noticing how his eyes seemed both sad and kind at the same time. He didn't know yet that this was Keanu Reeves, the famous actor. He didn't know that this moment would become a story he'd tell for years to come. All he knew was that something about this tall man's presence made him feel like maybe, just maybe, the day wasn't completely ruined after all. "Maybe we could look at something else," she suggested softly. "There are other pretty necklaces." But Tommy shook his head. It had to be this one. It was exactly like the one his mom had given up for him. Other necklaces might be nice, but they wouldn't mean the same thing. As they turned to leave, Tommy took one last look at the necklace. Mrs. Lee was carefully placing it back in its display case, the silver catching the light one more time, as if saying goodbye. What Tommy didn't know was that sometimes the universe has a way of stepping in just when we need it most. As he and Aunt Maria walked away from the counter, a tall figure in a black jacket entered the store. Neither of them noticed him at first, but this chance encounter was about to change everything. The day that had started with disappointment was far from over, and sometimes magic happens in the most unexpected moments, even in an ordinary mall on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. The familiar smell of cinnamon rolls and new shoes filled the air as Tommy and Aunt Maria walked through the sliding doors of Highland Mall. Tommy's Pokémon wallet felt heavy in his back pocket, and his fingers kept reaching back to make sure it was still there. Each step brought him closer to his mission's goal, and his heart flooded with excitement. "Slow down, Mio," Aunt Maria called out, laughing as Tommy practically bounced ahead of her. Her bracelets jingled as she adjusted her purse strap. The store isn't going anywhere. But Tommy couldn't help it. He'd been planning this day for so long that it felt like a dream finally coming true. The mall buzzed with weekend shoppers, families pushing strollers, teenagers hanging out by the fountain, elderly couples walking arm in arm. The sound of laughter and chatter mixed with music from different stores created a symphony of shopping center life. "Can we go to Henderson's first?" Tommy asked, trying to keep his voice casual even though his excitement made it crack a little. "I just want to look around." Aunt Maria's eyes twinkled knowingly. She'd been watching Tommy save his money for months, though he'd never told her exactly what he was saving for. "Of course, mi amor, lead the way." They passed the food court, where the smell of pizza and Chinese food made Tommy's stomach growl. On any other day, he would have begged for a pretzel or a smoothie, but not today. Today, every dollar was precious. As they approached Henderson's, Tommy's steps slowed. The display window that had first caught his eye weeks ago still showcased the beautiful silver necklace. It sparkled under the store lights, the heart-shaped pendant catching rays of sunshine from the skylight above. "It's pretty, isn't it?" Tommy said softly, more to himself than to his aunt. "It looks just like Mom's old one." Aunt Maria's expression softened as she looked at the necklace, then at her nephew. "Yes, it does," she said quietly, remembering her sister's sacrifice 2 years ago. Inside the store, Tommy's sneakers squeaked against the shiny floor as he made his way to the jewelry counter. Everything looked fancy and expensive, and he suddenly felt very small in his worn jeans and favorite Captain America t-shirt. A few other customers browsed nearby, a couple looking at watches, an older woman trying on bracelets. Behind the counter, a kind-faced lady with gray hair pulled into a bun smiled at them. Her name tag read Mrs. Lee. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her eyes crinkling warmly at Tommy. Tommy stood up as straight as he could, trying to look grown-up. "Yes, please." "The silver necklace in the window. The one with the heart? Could I see it?" Mrs. Lee's smile widened. "Of course, young man. That's a beautiful piece." She walked to the window display and carefully retrieved the necklace, bringing it back to show them. Up close, it was even prettier than Tommy had imagined. The silver chain was delicate but strong, just like his mom. The heart pendant had tiny designs etched into it that made it shimmer when it moved. "It's perfect," Tommy whispered, his eyes wide. He could already picture it around his mom's neck, replacing the empty space that had been there for too long. "Would you like to know the price?" Mrs. Lee asked gently. Tommy nodded, reaching for his Pokemon wallet. "Yes, please." His fingers clutched the $43.78 he'd worked so hard to save. Mrs. Lee turned over the small price tag attached to the necklace. "This piece is $149.99. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Tommy felt his chest tighten as the numbers echoed in his head. He looked down at his wallet, then back at the necklace. The gap between what he had and what he needed suddenly felt as wide as the Grand Canyon. "Oh," he said, his voice small. He tried to smile, but his lips wouldn't cooperate. "Thank you for showing it to me." Aunt Maria placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, understanding washing over her face. She wished she could help, but she knew her nephew wanted to do this on his own. Besides, her own budget was tight this month. Back in his room, Tommy pulled out his super-secret mission notebook, a dollar store composition book where he'd been planning Operation Best Birthday Ever. He'd seen the perfect gift last weekend when Aunt Maria took him to the mall. There, in the window of Henderson's department store, was a silver necklace that looked just like his mom's old one, delicate and sparkly, with a heart-shaped pendant that caught the light just right. Tommy flipped through his notebook, past pages of calculations and his carefully drawn picture of the necklace. He'd even cut out a coupon for Henderson's from the Sunday paper, though he wasn't sure if it would work for jewelry. The last page was his schedule of chores and odd jobs, with little stars next to each completed task. A warm breeze rustled the curtains of his open window, carrying the sounds of the neighborhood, kids playing basketball at the court down the street, the ice cream truck's distant jingle, Mrs. Chen's wind chimes. Tommy smiled, thinking about how surprised his mom would be. He imagined her face lighting up when she opened the gift, how she might cry happy tears like she did at his school play last year. Aunt Maria's car horn hummed from outside, their signal that it was time to go to the mall. Tommy's heart started beating faster with excitement. He grabbed his Pokemon wallet and carefully tucked it into his back pocket, patting it twice for good luck. "This is it," he whispered to himself, straightening his shoulders like his mom did when she was about to do something important. Operation Best Birthday Ever is now officially starting. The mission he'd been planning for half a year was finally beginning, but Tommy had no idea that what was about to happen at the mall would turn out to be more magical than anything he could have imagined. Sometimes the best parts of life are the ones we don't plan for, the moments that catch us by surprise and change everything in ways we never expected. The soft glow of a desk lamp illuminated Tony Martinez's small bedroom as he carefully spread out his life savings on the worn wooden desk. His Spider-Man piggy bank sat empty beside him, and his hands moved methodically as he arranged the crumpled dollar bills and scattered coins into neat piles. 10, 20, 30, he whispered to himself, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. The 8-year-old had been saving every penny for the past 6 months. Each time Mrs. Chen from next door asked him to help water her plants, that was $2. When old Mr. Rodriguez needed his newspapers picked up while he recovered from hip surgery, another $5. Even the Tooth Fairy's recent visit had contributed to his growing fund. His mom's birthday was just 2 weeks away, and Tommy wanted to make it special, really special. Not like last year when all he could give her was a handmade card and a macaroni necklace. He loved how she'd worn that macaroni necklace to breakfast every Sunday for a month, but this year needed to be different. This year he was bigger and he understood more. He understood why the light in her eyes seemed a little dimmer when she came home from her night shifts at the hospital. He noticed how she would sit at their small kitchen table late at night, surrounded by bills, her fingers pressing against her temples as she worked out their monthly budget. He saw how she never bought new clothes for herself, but always made sure he had everything he needed for school. $43 and... Tommy squinted at the pile of coins, moving his lips as he counted 78 cents. He sat back in his chair, a proud smile spreading across his face. It was more money than he'd ever had in his whole life. From the living room, he could hear the familiar sounds of his mom getting ready for another 12-hour shift. The coffee maker gurgled, her work shoes clicked against the tile floor, and her keys jingled as she gathered her things. Tommy quickly swept the money into his Pokemon wallet, tucking it safely in his desk drawer. "Tommy, honey," his mom called out. "Aunt Maria's coming to stay with you tonight. There's mac and cheese in the fridge, and don't forget to finish your science homework." He rushed out to give her a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo mixed with coffee. She looked tired already, her nurse's scrubs slightly wrinkled, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. But she still gave him that special smile, the one that made her eyes crinkle at the corners and made him feel like the most important person in the world. "Love you, Mom," he said, squeezing her extra tight. "Love you more, Mio," she replied, kissing the top of his head. "Be good for your aunt, okay?" As she headed out the door, Tommy caught a glimpse of the empty space on her neck where her old necklace used to be. He remembered the day she'd taken it off about 2 years ago. She'd told him she'd lost it, but he'd overheard her talking to Aunt Maria about selling it to buy his school supplies and new shoes. The memory made his chest feel tight.